Welcome everyone to another episode of CISO Talks. Today we're joined by Nick Lumsden. Nick is the CTO and co-founder of Tenacity Cloud, and he has more than 20 years experience in security and compliance. So we're very excited to have you here today, Nick. Why don't you start with just telling us a little bit about yourself and about Tenacity Cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Danny, for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. Tenacity Cloud is really born out of my experiences, myself, my business partner, Jason, our experiences in managing security and compliance in infrastructure stacks through the past 20 years. The same problems have persisted over and over. And public cloud really afforded us the opportunity to solve some of them. As hardware became software, suddenly security problems turn into big data problems. And we've approached the foundational security problem from that perspective of turn it into big data, gather insight, analyze the data, gather insight, and help users actually prioritize the things that need to get done that are the massive risks that lead to exposure at some point. So. Myself, I think you did a good introduction. I'm just happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, well, again, Nick, it's great to have you here. Let's start right at the beginning. Let's start with foundational security. I think where we really need to start is understanding why it's so hard to get it right. And the operational realities of cybersecurity, really. So, we talk about organizations that have spent a lot of time building and running highly secure infrastructures. Why do you think it's so hard to get it right? And why do we see kind of breaches and attacks all over the news, even today?
Yeah, I think, this is one of those persistent problems that it feels like, we should have solved this by now. And there's a number of factors that contribute. And I think, I think your audience will identify with some, if not all of these. And start with the most obvious, it's in the news all the time, is just the staffing shortages and the amount of overwork on, IT and cybersecurity staff. That's number one. There are right around, last time I looked, right around 500,000 open jobs in cybersecurity that are just hard to fill. It's just the shift of people in the Great Migration that is leaving a gap. And, as we've all experienced, when folks are, have more on their plate than they can consume, then there are important things that slip through the cracks. It's unfortunate, but that is part of the reality. I think there's other realities here. Our rate of change in technology has gone from 20 years ago, it was quarterly, maybe monthly was aggressive. And now we're making dozens, if not hundreds of changes a day. And every change introduces risk. It's not to say you shouldn't make changes. Absolutely, you should make changes because it's important, both from a business strategic perspective, but also from just the perspective of change is also how you remediate issues. But, that rate of change can lead to all sorts of visibility issues where you just don't have insight into necessarily all the nuance of the impact a change has in an infrastructure. And this leads to things like sprawl, where orphaned and abandoned resources crop up. You don't necessarily know about them, and they create attack surface. And that attack, that's unfortunately, that's unmanaged attack surface, right? That's not even well protected attack surface. That can be, that could be storage resources or even instance resources that are just hanging out, sometimes for months and years before someone finds them and remediates that. I think there's a number of other factors we could touch on, from, kind of business priorities, investment in cybersecurity, things like alert fatigue and in our own human behaviors that are sort of modified through seeing that noise in the system, getting overwhelmed with the number of tools we're using. But, happy to touch on any of those that we want to dig deeper.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's really about understanding risk and where to and how to prioritize those risks. And obviously, you mentioned there alert fatigue, and we've got all of these different solutions. A lot of the time working in silo and pumping out all of these alerts and notifications and trying to make us aware. And then we just get to the point where it's very hard to see it's very hard to kind of identify the alerts or notifications that are actually giving us any kind of meaningful information about any identifiable risk. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's one of the ways to reduce. There's basically two ways to reduce noise, right? You can either shut off some of the alerting, which is not necessarily the best way to reduce the noise because you're potentially increasing risk. The other is to remediate and try to get configuration right or minimize your attack surface right. If you can minimize what you have to watch, you will necessarily reduce the amount of noise in the system. And so that at the end of the day, for me, is why foundational security I've seen throughout my career, getting configuration right, getting your infrastructure right, really making sure that you're taking tens of thousands of gaps and narrowing it down to the dozens or hundreds that you need for your app to run is absolutely fundamental in reducing about 2/3 of the risk in managing a good cybersecurity program. It's not just the risk from the misconfiguration, it's the risk from all the noise. It's the risk from kind of the behavioral challenges that crop up when you have so much noise.
And then when you talk about reducing the attack surface, and I think you kind of touched on there about reducing privileges as well. So making sure that we're operating in every area that we can with this least privilege model. How would you make a recommendation with regards to how to even approach reducing your attack surface? What have you got any kind of specific areas that you would look at first within an organization's infrastructure?
The very first thing to do, what I have seen throughout my career going into doing assessments and of course now having built, a platform that helps in this arena, is that the very first thing to do is look for where are the abandoned and orphaned resources, because some not insignificant percentage of the environment is just legacy infrastructure that's sitting out there. And it can be surprising, startling to organizations when they find it. In fact, the knee-jerk reaction, as with most really big issues, is no, that's absolutely not. We don't have that. And I can tell you, going in and doing assessments, running analytics against environments, we have found instances where customers are running in the tens of thousands, approaching hundreds of thousands of dollars in spending that is just orphaned or abandoned. It's QA resources that were spun up and never spun back down. It is production resources that somebody didn't want to delete because just in case we might need them, and then they were never cleaned up afterward. And that all of those resources generate noise. They're useless in the environment, but they're generating noise and they're hiding the real problems. So that's the first thing to get right.